How much, Courtney, am I allowed to wander? Is that hard for you, or is that not hard for you? Not hard? Okay. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I like to be prompt and to start on time and to end on time, and so it's 6:30. So we're going to start. I see that there are people trickling in, and that's fine. And we're going to start. As I lead, so I hope you're in the right place. This is Conversations on Grief with me, Cathy Kolwey. I always like to start with just a little 2-minute reflection that might focus you in. And so I've put something on the table to use as a reflection. Now, I've already heard feedback that people don't like to draw and are scared to draw. My response to that is, answer it however you want. The idea is just to get you thinking about someone, as you walk into this space, someone you might miss right now, in this space, on this evening at 6:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. Who do you miss? And we'll just take 2 minutes to do it.
It's funny because I almost feel unbalanced not carrying that oxygen. You know, I'm so used to carrying the oxygen.
Oh, wow.
I'm off balance.
Stick figures are okay. Icons and symbols are okay. The goal is just to have you reflect for a second. So you can wrap that activity up in just the next 10 or 15 seconds. We're not necessarily going to share this activity with anybody else. But part of the reason I give this activity is it reminds me and other people that the question is, who do I miss? Which can be answered incredibly broadly. It's not who in my life has died, but rather, who do I miss? So I might miss my dog. I might miss my friend that I've been friends with since I was 13 years old who lives in Maryland. I might miss, there's a whole broad range of scenarios that cause grief. And so that's kind of the purpose of that activity, is to just have you realize that, yes, grief is about death, but grief is about all different kinds of loss and all different kinds of change. And so, there you go. As we come together again, I'm going to start by just reminding us of the covenant that we created for and with each other last week. As we talk about grief, we're going to be in vulnerable space with one another, so I like to set some vulnerability rules. So we agreed last week, we're going to use I statements when sharing, that you are responsible for your own self-soothing. So if something's triggering to you or you get really upset, like, I'm going to continue with the class, don't let it take over the table. What happens in grief group stays in grief group, just like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I teach this class to pastors a lot, and I have to put that line in for them, because I have to say to them, you're not allowed to hear somebody's story and use it in a sermon. So that's the onus of that one. And then I always like to say, we're going to be vulnerable. And as we are, everybody gets to get on the elevator wherever they want, and everybody gets to get off the elevator wherever they want. Some people are really going to want to share, and they're going to want to take that elevator to the 75th floor. Other people are going to get on at 1, and they're going to get off at 2. And all of that is okay. If you feel like sharing, that's okay. If you don't feel like sharing, this is a safe space for silence as well. So all of these that we're going to covenant together, agree at your table that you're going to follow these, are really just so that we can create safe space for one another. And if you weren't here last week, the goals that I kind of set for this class is just, I want us to create a common language so that when we gather together, we can talk about our individual grief and our collective grief with a common language. So that's actually sort of the biggest part of this goal. I also want to provide safe space for us to do a little processing together. And then when we get to the end of the 4 weeks, we're going to share ideas and resources about how we can continue this together going into the future. And I'll hear feedback from you all as to what that might look like. Okay, so that's kind of what we went over last week. So last week, we really talked about grief is more than just death. It's any loss or change where you have felt a bond, and then you're either losing the bond or the bond is changing somehow. And so we went through a whole bunch of different things that can cause that. And we talked a bit about all of the different types of grief. And we explained a lot of these last week. We're not going to go through a ton of these again. But as we learn this language, just this idea of I have complicated grief, or I have compound grief, or I have traumatic grief. One of the ones that we didn't hit last week that I think is important, because many of us are caregivers, many of us have helping professions. We're teachers and nurses and pastors, is this idea that we can have secondary grief. If I am a nurse and I watch my patient and their family as my patient dies, I may actually pick up the grief that they're carrying. In theory, nurses should have a level of boundary, but we're all real people, right? So somebody, will remind you, or you have your teacher and you have a student that suddenly, tells you part of their story, and you carry that home with you. And so there is this idea that we can carry somebody else's grief around with us simply by being in close proximity to them. So imagine, if you're on the board of deacons, or you may be carrying secondary grief as well. Does anybody that was here last week want to, popcorn about one of these that felt particularly important or was a particularly good learning from last week? I'm looking at you. Because of what you said you said two things last week. One was about COVID, and you hadn't really framed COVID as a process of traumatic grief and collective. It's both traumatic and collective grief. And we talked a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about complicated grief is when I, as a, let's say I'm a 50-something mom, and my son I'm empty nesting because my son just graduated and moved, and at the same time, my mom gets a dementia diagnosis, and so I'm actually carrying 3 different levels of grief that's complicated grief. And none of it, we all think empty nest is like the great, like success, yay, celebrate. But like there's actually a lot of grief that is associated with empty nest. So when we're carrying multiple different things that cause grief at the same time, it creates complicated grief. This is all review from last week, so I should move more quickly, right? Right? Okay. Any thoughts or questions on what we did last week before we move into what the topic for tonight is going to be? You guys are quiet. You weren't quiet last week.
Okay, I will share.
Get the mic. We do have a few people who have been joining us online, so I'm going to be more of a policeman about making sure everybody has a mic in their hand when they talk.
Okay, thanks. I was unprepared for all the feelings that I would feel within the first 24 hours of this class.
Yeah.
And I'm finding myself wanting to be pretty protective of what you share because it was hard.
Yeah.
Not because it wasn't important, but it was hard and it was helpful, and I'm grateful.
Yeah. And it's going to get harder. Hang in with me. And hopefully that's good. That's a good thing. And that we're going to create a language together so that we can continue these conversations and they don't feel so vulnerable and they don't feel so needed to be protected. Anybody else? Elgin, you're quiet and in the back row. Did I tease you too much last week?
I'm always quiet. I wanted to sit at
Introverts table, but Sally wouldn't let you. I love it. Okay. Tonight, our major discussion is going to be around the idea of secondary loss. Now, I'm going to share a couple personal stories with you. I wish somebody had given me this visual right here 5.5 years ago. Because, and I don't know if all of you know this part of my story, but I lost my life partner, my son's father, 6 years ago. And it was very complicated. I'll just leave it at that. Complicated, ambiguous loss is the language that I would use. But I didn't have language. And you know what? If I could I have these so you don't have to look at them online, if somebody will help me pass them out. I didn't understand what was going to happen. And so here are my personal stories. When my son was a little kid, his dad was the best parent ever. So much so that when Sam would fall off of his bike or get hurt, or this is what would happen. He would go, "Mommy, I fell off my bike. go get daddy. Go get daddy. Because daddy was the caregiver, you know. And I am okay, you know, like I'm okay with that. But when we lost him, the reason I needed this chart is I needed somebody to say to me, what you're feeling is a secondary loss. That not only did I lose a life partner, but I also lost a co-parent. And that for me was the number one hardest part, because I really leaned on this other person to be making ultimately the parenting decisions. And I felt inadequate as a parent. I'll just lay it out that way. You know, and so as we look, this chart is created specifically around the loss of a spouse, which the American Psychiatric Network has kind of decided is the most stressful event that can happen in your life. And I know lots of widows from a widows group who talk about this chart all the time. You know, there's so much that can happen when you lose a spouse. That there might suddenly be financial burden. You lose loss of income. You lose financial security. You lose a loss of confidence. You maybe lose friends that were in a different social network than what you know, if they were primarily your spouse's friends. You might lose your house. You might need to downsize and move into a smaller condo. You know, you might lose just an overall sense of security. There are lots of other things that happen when we experience a significant loss. Now, first, are there any reactions to this or any initial feedback, initial thought? Does it seem right? Yeah. Microphone. Just turn it on and pass it around. There you go. No, everybody needs it because we have people joining us online. So hello to the people joining us online.
I had a loss of someone who didn't die, but had cancer and still alive and still my best friend. But I had to go through almost every one of these, except for I'm retired, so I didn't have the job loss, but
right.
I didn't lose the home.
Yes.
But we had to sell her place. We had to downsize her. We had to get her in a friendship village. We had to get oxygen. All of a sudden, she had need oxygen and everything. And even though we're still together, and I'm hoping the doctor isn't right when he said you're going to live 4 years.
Yeah.
Boy, I hated hearing that.
Were you here last week?
Yes.
Anticipatory grief?
It was that.
Anticipatory grief.
You know, when the person's still with you, which you like.
Yep.
But the loss, just from a physical standpoint, when they get a terminal illness and have to make big changes, you know, like, I guess we're not going to go to Aruba, you know, like we'd always hoped, because, you know, travel is quite limited. She's quite weak, you know.
Yeah.
But when you still love someone till death do you part.
Yeah. Yep.
But they're still there. It's not like, it doesn't have to be a death to go through all these.
Right.
I went through all these when someone had a physical
And this is why I
decline.
think this chart is so important, because when you combined what we talked about last week and this idea that you don't just lose a person, you lose all of these other functions and roles and responsibilities, you know, and this is specifically death of a spouse, but it can happen with any kind of grief. With any kind of grief, there will be a secondary loss of some kind. You know, I'll give you an example. I lose my dog, right? Not only have I lost my dog, But I've also lost my exercise routine because my exercise routine was walking my dog 3 times a day. And so suddenly we're out of sorts, we're not exercising, and we don't know why. Well, that's a secondary loss of grief. So I think, like I said, I wish somebody would have handed me this chart on day 1. Is there anybody else who wasn't here last week who wants the definitions of the type of grief? Okay. Can I have you just pass that back to her? Thank you. Okay, we have a question from the online person. Is there a link to the chart? There is not right this minute, but we can get one later, but maybe not for this class. But thank you for asking that question, person who is online. And so I actually want us to spend like the next maybe 15 or 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And I want you to be courageous, okay? This is where we're going to get vulnerable together. I have an empty chart. Can I have you pass those out again? Thank you. What I want you to do is pick a specific loss. Like I just did, I said, I lost my dog, right? And then go through and think about what might be some of the secondary losses that are happening with that primary grief. Okay? Now, if we are going to get really courageous together, and this may be too much too soon, and that's okay. I want at least 1 or 2 people to consider writing in that center circle, loss of a pastor. The ambiguous loss of losing a pastor. And what are the secondary losses that you're feeling right now? And if that feels too much too soon or too hard, then pick a different loss. You can do this with divorce. You can do this with illness, diagnosis of an illness. You can do this with loss of a pet. You can do this with loss of a parent, loss of a child, any one of those. So I'm just, and I'm not going to be prescriptive on this one because I know extroverts might want to share. Introverts, if you're not at this table, there's still a chance to be at this table. The pressure is off and you don't have to share. But I would so we'll just start to fill out the chart. Fill out the chart. And online, folks, I don't have a way to load that chart up just yet, but you can just kind of do a mind map and scribble on scrap paper and work through the activity as well.
And Cathy,
Yes.
are we supposed to do our own chart here, or are we supposed to focus on the loss of a pastor?
You can do either one. If that is the loss that you're feeling on your heart right now, you can do that. And if that is too vulnerable, you don't have to. You can pick something. And, I think the safe one is pick loss of a dog. Pick loss of a pet. That's a pretty safe one to kind of explore that idea of what else do I lose when I lose a pet? it looks like many of you are almost have your circles filled. So maybe we'll start by, if you could share at the table, maybe just what you picked to put in the center, and if there was a particular aha or learning that came from filling in the outer circles, as you feel comfortable. As you feel comfortable.
You had better people at your table last week than we are, because the Williamsons who were.
Do you guys go to this church?
We're here and used later, because they said
Yeah.
the conversation
Yeah,
just got.
so I did use pastor,
Oh, uh-huh.
Very good.
so,
Very
It's
and
some
I
kind of big deal for you.
have long gone to Thursday morning dudes and donuts
I'll tell you what,
that Jeff did, which was just typically 8 to 12 people, 8 to 12
A
guys.
small
And Jeff
intimate group.
prepared a talking points about some particular Christian idea or Bible thing. And we met at 7 o'clock. You actually had to be there a little before 7 if you wanted to get a seat up close, so I'm getting a little hard of hearing. And so, yeah, the loss of that little competitive fight, but you had to be really early, and Jeff spent a lot of time preparing for that silly little dudes and donuts thing. But it was very, very personal and very open and caring. Lots of fond memories from back when Jeff was a youth pastor, because I go way, way, way back with him. He was a he was a confidant, person to consult with on personal issues, because he was open to anybody. Non-church people would call him and want to sit down and talk to him. Also a longtime friend. Also Colonial Church. I'm still like Lake Calhoun.
You're digging your heels in for name changes.
cmcolway.com.
Still digging my heels
Yeah,
in
you can use that
on
one.
that whole issue,
Yep.
because I joined the church and became a member in 1972 over at the old place on Wooddale. And to me, Colonial is colonial. And his sermons were very personal, caring, sharing. Loss of his family, Tammy, his wife Tammy.
She and her
Think
mother
about
aren't
her.
around anymore.
Son-in-law just resigned too.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
That word today.
Patrick resigned. Okay, that's another loss for our church.
His,
Dropped out, and then somebody else in the office, staff, financial, I can't remember her name. She also resigned.
huh,
Said, "We're dropping like flies here. We got to do something.
Yeah.
Pretty soon there's only going to be the choir."
yeah. So, yeah. I view this whole scheme here as schematic, as kind of a little bit of matter of fact, because all of our lives are very complex and complicated and have a lot of different stuff. Friends, activities, loved ones, family, financial, you name it. So, yeah, there's any loss, whether you're divorced or loss of a partner, or spouse, anything like that. We're all complicated.
Someone who kind of ran the mechanics of the church.
Yeah. kind of a matter-of-fact person, I guess. I guess things happen, and we got to move on. You lose a job, and there was a lawsuit. Co-workers, friends,
Income.
social friends from work and everything, and income. And where do you go from here? Is your family going to dissolve unless you get a new job quickly? And most of us have all been there. So,
Yeah, just being human here on this earth means having many losses. And the older we get, the more losses we've experienced. Oh, yeah.
That's all sentimental.
Well, I wrote, I thought maybe you would, I didn't see what you were writing about. I thought you maybe would have written about the loss of, you have also had 2 significant losses in a very short amount of time, despite, and on top of losing Jeff.
Write it down.
My husband died 9 years ago next month, and many of the things I just copied from here because most of them applied. But let's see, I thought one I kind of made up on my own. Well, feeling, I have a loss of feeling being safe. Because I would never was alone before. Loss of our future together, loss of self-confidence, loss of companion for
I have extra ones
activities,
of those, yes.
although he and I are now partners. But I did write down loss of someone to be talking to most or all of the time, and that's because we don't live together. Definitely loss of financial security, oh my gosh. But despite all that, I'm doing fine. And we are very supportive of each other, and we have supportive kids. Yes, of course it is. Yes.
Okay. I am going to pull us together as an entire group. I know that there is good conversationing happening at the individual tables, but we do have a few people joining us online, and I want them to have the fullest, most robust conversation that we can have as well. So, what did your tables choose, and what did you share? Maybe just 1 or 2 things. And you can pick a spokesman for the group or everybody. You guys can talk however you want to talk. What did you choose, and what did you share?
Do you need you go ahead, Bill. He's got a more interesting.
Phil, it's nice to meet you. I'm Cathy. We're going to get you the microphone.
Thank you, Jerry.
Did you say
We
Bill
shared-
or Phil?
Bill,
Bill.
as in boob.
Okay.
Duh. I shared the traumatic experience of the loss of both legs last year,
Yeah.
and all the changes that we have and continue to go through every day. And we also shared the loss of the pastor
Yep.
at the table, and discussed different aspects of that.
Yep. We're going to get to that directly in a minute, but
Yeah.
and so I'm not going to put you on the spot, but like loss of mobility in any form, it changes your travel habits, it changes your exercise routines, it changes your ability to be in community with one another. What else would you say? Because I'm not the expert, but what else would you say?
Yeah, it's almost every aspect of life.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to drive for 18 months and ended up spending a few $1,000s just getting requalified to drive back in
Yep.
June. And,
Yeah, I didn't think about that one.
Yeah.
The loss of driving.
But even now, even though I can physically drive the car and it's legal for me to drive the car, I can't get into the car without Elaine's assistance.
Yeah.
Because I need the wheelchair to get to the car.
Yeah.
And like I tell people, I have one prosthetic. My other one's in the shop. I just don't have it yet.
Yeah.
Because this one's still healing.
Yeah.
So, that'll be another 2 or 3 months. And so I hope to be walking next summer.
Yeah.
So, what I thought
We're
might
going to pray you up.
What I thought
Yeah.
might be 9 to 12 months is going to be easily 12 or more.
Right.
So it's just, and I think the thing that surprised me the most was, I've been to the hospital before, but I always came back with all my parts. And life returned relatively back to normal. I may have had a shoulder repaired or something, but I
Yeah.
still had a shoulder and I still had an arm.
Right.
And I suddenly woke up 6 or 8 months ago and said, gee, this is not the same. Feet don't grow back.
Yeah.
So it's been very different. And without Elaine, this would have been absolutely impossible. She's like the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
But I lost my identity as a wife, and now I'm a caregiver.
Say it into the microphone.
I lost my identity as just a wife, and now I'm more known as a caregiver.
Right.
And I'd like the other one back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Those are so real and so vulnerable. Thank you for being willing to share that. But yeah, that's a great point for people who, have a spouse that gets dementia, gets Parkinson's, gets, ALS, insert whatever. Loss of spousehood in replacement of caregiver is a huge loss. It's a huge secondary loss. So thank you for naming that for us. Yeah. Anybody else want to share before we get into the before we start talking about the elephant in the room? Anybody else want to share what you chose to write about? Of course I'm looking at you because I overheard some of what you said. Okay. Yeah, let's get the microphone over here.
So one of the personal things that I shared that I know I'm not alone in this is sleep.
Oh, yeah.
When I don't get the sleep that I really need, it really impacts every single aspect of my life and all of my relationships.
Yeah.
I'm not patient, I'm not kind, I don't get the physical activity I need, I don't experience joy, and I am in the middle of that right in this minute, where last night I just didn't sleep as good as I have in the past. And this is the perfect exercise to validate, so thank you.
Yeah. I'll share one more little quick story, and then we'll take the last 15 minutes. My son changed school this year. He's in 11th grade, so he only has 2 more years of school left. And it is the best decision ever for us. His new school, it is the best decision ever. What I didn't realize, my secondary loss. So here is my super social kid. He went from a school where he had lots of friends, and he's extroverted. So he went to another school, and now he has 2 sets of friends. And he's balancing, who do I spend time with? And I mean, it is 1,000% good. What I didn't realize is I lost an entire community of parents that I used to sit in the bleachers with, that I used to go to sporting events with, and they're not talking to me anymore because I'm not in the bleacher. But because we only have 2 years left, the chance that I'm going to make really solid, well, not 10-year friendships with a new set of parents, I never anticipated that. But that's a secondary loss for me with the positive change of Sam's school. So this is why I say even good changes can cause grief. You know? And I feel like I feel a vulnerableness in the room. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I want to have everybody take a deep breath. Just breathe it in and breathe it out. And for those of you that had the courage to write in that center circle, loss of a pastor, what would you name as some of the secondary losses? While we get the microphone to whoever wants it first, you know, I'm going to say things like, who's going to do my funeral? Who's going to do my wedding? Who's going to baptize my child in 3 months? Because that's when the baptism was scheduled. Who will be my confidant? Who will pray with me in the hospital? All of these are really real, really real, and really valid secondary losses. But I don't want to talk through this part. I want the microphone to go around for anybody that feels comfortable. Huh? No one wants to speak first. You will?
I was thinking, don't all speak.
Don't all speak at once.
Okay, I put in the center loss of pastors.
Pastors, yeah.
Because
Yep.
for me, it's not one pastor.
It's two.
It's more than two.
Or three.
And for me,
Oh, yeah.
because I go to the alternative service, it's a loss in a way of a service that I loved the way it was. I've lost the voices that really spoke, messages that broadened my concepts of God and faith, and so I'm really missing that. And I'm missing the music. I'm missing. So the change that's come is not change that I'm particularly embracing.
Right?
I'm here.
Yep.
But I have a real sense of loss in that service, and a loss of vision that I thought, as we came out of COVID, to me we had this I was so excited about what was going on here because I felt like we had a really big tent and that God spoke in all sorts of voices, and there was a place for everyone. And people who love traditional, wonderful, great. I was so glad. And we have a great organ, and we have a great choir, and great. But I loved what was being offered in the alternative service, and that vision wasn't embraced makes me really sad. So.
And I put that down too, both for missing the individual pastors, but also I feel losses about the institution. A loss of confidence in where we're going, a loss of comfort. There just seems to be more anxiety in the air, more disappointment, a loss of whatever progress we were making towards unity. So I feel just losses to the church in general and how I feel about it.
And I'm going to echo back because I think what you said 3 really important things. Loss of confidence, loss of what I would call institutional memory, and then what was the third thing that you said? It was really good. Trust, loss of trust. Those were the 3 that it's like, real, solid, secondary losses. Thank you for naming them so articulately and clearly. Yeah. Jim is going to be the voice of the online community.
So we have a couple of things online. First of all, Bob, you have a cheerleader who just said you can do it.
You can do it, Bob.
Yeah, you can do it.
From online.
And the secondary loss, who will speak to my heart and who will pray for me? And then there was an amen to what Sally said.
Yeah. That's very real. Who will pray for me? It's very real. Microphone. I'll hand you mine.
One thing that I wrote down is Pastor Jeff, he baptized all three of my kids, and my kids just adore him. My kids bring stuffed animals to church. It's a little trade-off that we do. And every Sunday he would, "Who'd you bring today?" And I'm feeling the secondary loss of, especially an adult male. My kids have all had female teachers, and I've connected with a lot of females, but an adult male that they trust and love, and who loves them and knows them.
Yeah. And I'm going to echo that, speaking as a parent and not as the facilitator of this group, and say, you know, I have a 16-year-old that lost his male parent when he was 10, and I have watched him search and search and search for good male role models. Yeah. Yep. What else? What else is on your heart?
We talked a little bit about loss of the community in terms of young parents with young kids and the youth ministry over the last 5 years just completely changing. And so I guess it's more of a worry of the possible loss of more community, more family friends, you know, rumors of families kind of dividing or leaving. So then it was kind of like a loss of a sense of control, like we're kind of losing control of the situation.
Yeah.
And also, like the circle says, loss of dreams for the future, because I kind of had things laid out in my mind about what youth group and youth ministry would look like here, and that sense of belonging and being in community.
Yeah, loss of a sense of belonging. Yeah. I don't know if anybody did a circle around divorce, but like how much you experience a loss of belonging when you get divorced, and then suddenly like you had maybe a big family and now half of it is just not, you don't have access to it anymore. It's huge. It's huge, that loss of belonging. So thank you for naming that and being vulnerable. I mean, you all are being very courageous right now, and I just want to thank you for being willing to share these things. Yeah. Who would like to go next? Anyone? Yeah. Can we pass the microphone back?
I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth here. I have a lack of confidence that the whole picture of the problems at, I said Colonial Meeting House, will not be evaluated all the way down. It's almost like I feel there should be for everybody to look at it and have what did I tell you? Kind of a guideline as to what a church should have. a basic formula. That's what I'm trying to say. A basic formula. Start at the bottom.
Yep.
Because the problems, some of the problems started long before Jeff leaving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's accumulated. I mean, we've seen it since Mark and the Stover and the organist and Pastor Daniel and down the line Danielle. And lack of confidence that the whole picture is really going to be looked at with open eyes.
Yeah. And so I'm going to frame that in the language that we're trying to create together, right? So what you named is a loss of confidence, and that comes from the complicated grief of having multiple losses in the last 10 years, right? That losing Danielle was a loss. And I'm only about 6-7 years into this, so I probably don't know all the names that you just named. Her and her husband, who was Daniel. No, Brian. Yeah. So, right. And so here's the thing. When we don't grieve well, right, and we don't process through our grief, it tends to come back and bite us later on. And I'll give you 2 examples that don't have anything to do with the church. I have a woman in my assisted living facility who lost her husband from a heart attack about 14 years ago. And it just so happened that she and her husband had purchased a puppy about a week before her husband died. And she literally replaced her husband with that puppy, right down to he slept on her shoulder at night. Well, about 6 months ago, she lost her dog. And I was in her suite every single day, and she was like, I don't understand. I didn't cry this hard for my husband. And I said, well, of course you didn't, because you took all of that grief and loss. Because remember, we talked last week about how grief really is love, and it is love with no place to go. Well, what happened to that woman is she took all of the grief of her husband and the love that she had for him, and they had been married for like 60 years, and she put it into that dog. When the dog died, she could not go on. She experienced grief like she had never felt before. Another example, very similar, a woman she had 2 brothers, and she lost a brother to schizophrenia like 15 years ago. She just lost her brother, her second brother. And again, she's having the same, I never grieved my first brother because, and again, this gets back to the language, it was, no one really talked about it because it was mental illness, so it became this ambiguous loss that nobody wanted to name. So she felt like she couldn't grieve that because, people would say things to her like, oh, he's better off because he had this illness. And, she didn't grieve the one 15 years ago. So she's losing her second brother, and she would say over and over again, I feel like I'm losing the first brother all over again. Well, yeah, you are. And so now I'll bring it back to the church. If we have experienced multiple losses in the last 10 years, say, and maybe, those of you who have been here longer, correct me if I have the timing wrong. It might be 15, it might be 12, it might, whatever. If we have experienced multiple losses together, and we aren't naming them, we aren't processing them for whatever reason, then today's losses, and there are 2 of equal value, today's losses will feel like all of the last 15 years piled on top. And so let's name that with each other. Let's be vulnerable with that with each other. And let's use common language to help each other through it. And, you know, it doesn't have to just be church stuff. You know, maybe I lost my dad, and then I lost my uncle, and now, you know, losing another male role model feels triply bad because I lost my dad and I lost my uncle. I mean, you know, you all get it. I can see that you get it by the vulnerability in your eyes. And so we are just about at 7:30. And I like to start on time and I like to end on time. I want to say you all have been very courageous tonight. So thank you for the courage and the vulnerability. I am here until 9 o'clock because I have a kid in high school youth group. And so I am available to talk to anybody, individually or in a small group. I am available to you. And I always like to end by closing us with just a poem. So, tonight, I'm going to have you take a deep breath, and thank you for the people who are joining online. I'm going to have you take a deep breath and close your eyes if it feels comfortable. And I am going to read Blessed Are You Who Bears the Light by Jan Richardson. Blessed are you who bear the light in unbearable times, who testify to its endurance amid the unendurable, who bear witness to its persistence when everything seems in shadow and grief. Blessed are you in whom the light lives, in whom the brightness blazes, your heart a chapel, an altar where in the deepest night can be seen the fire that shines forth in you, in unaccountable faith, in stubborn hope, in love that illumines every broken thing it finds. Amen. We have done hard work here, so I will just say to you, be gentle with yourselves and each other. And I'm here.